What's shakin' bacons? I know it's been a while since I have filmed last. My apologies for the delay in between videos. Mr. Warden and I had a medical emergency happen right around Christmas, so most of my time has been spent attempting to deal with that and take care of him. But things are starting to look like they're on the up and up, and so I had time to actually sit down and see a movie and start filming again. So let's talk about Glass. This review will be non-spoilers in the beginning, and I will warn you before I get into spoilers at the end so nothing is ruined for you if you are planning on seeing this movie. This movie is written, produced, and directed by M. Night Shymalan, of course, which made me very trepidatious walking into this film because he's burned me in the past. I think he's burned a lot of people in the past, most notably, as I've mentioned previously, is Avatar: The Last Airbender. I will never forgive him for that. So, because he has burned me in the past, I went into this film with a degree of fear, thinking, please let this not be as bad as my memories of Shyamalan films have been. I did hear that a recent film he did with these grandkids was pretty good, however, I did not see that. I don't think I have seen any of his films since Avatar: The Last Airbender, because I haven't been able to make myself do so. Anyway, Glass is the story of three individuals. Glass, played by Samuel L. Jackson, David Dunn, played by Bruce Willis, and Kevin Crumb, who is played by James McAvoy. All three of these people believe that they have superpowers and they end up in the same psychiatric hospital that are being evaluated by Dr. Ellie Staple, who is trying to convince them that their superpowers are all in their heads and that they are not actually people that possess more powers than a normal human does, and that everything that's happened to them and things that they perceive are really just a result of coincidences and damage in their frontal lobe. Glass is able to orchestrate somehow a meeting with the Beast, who is one of the alter egos that Kevin Crumb kind of goes into with his split personalities. In that meeting, they attempt to orchestrate a breakout, including Bruce Willis's character. Their plan is to get out of the mental institution and prove to the world that they are not crazy and that they are indeed possessors of superhuman abilities. Anything else I say at this point is probably going to give away the main plot point, so I'm going to stop right there. And I need to be very transparent at this point in time as I start to talk about this film. I had no idea that this is the third in a trilogy. I had absolutely no idea. I didn't find out until I made sure when I was writing this review, I googled the doctor's name because I couldn't catch her last name while I was watching the movie, and the Wikipedia's page said that this was the third in a trilogy. And me not knowing that this was a trilogy had a very strong impact on how I took in and absorbed and analyzed the story. For the most part, I pieced together what was happening, and through guessing and conjecture, you can kind of understand where a story is going and where its roots stem from. But not knowing that there were two prior films to this and just entering blindly into the final act was definitely not ideal for me when it came to reviewing this film. So I actually did reevaluate the scale and the rating I had initially given the movie and adjusted it accordingly. So I did take that into consideration. And if you have not seen this movie and you didn't know it was a trilogy like me, do yourself a favor and watch the first two before you see this one. Unlike other trilogies or some movies where you can just kind of pick up in the middle of a series and get what's going on, that's not the case here. The story does bank very heavily on the viewer having already seen the prior two films, the first of which is Unbreakable that came out in 2000, and the second of which is Split, and it came out in 2016. And if you haven't seen those two, you are going to be confused. Characters will not make as much sense, and the backstory is also not going to make as much sense, so I highly recommend go see the first two. Regardless, this is a very interesting story, and as someone who didn't know it was a trilogy, I simply approached this from the point of view of it was an interesting examination that played off of the current fascination with superhero and villain movies, in that it addresses people that think they have those powers and then forces them to confront whether or not it's all in their head. Are these people real or are they not real? Are these events that have happened real or did they never really happen? And I thought, coming from not knowing the other two movies, this was an incredibly interesting premise for a film, and it is. This is the first movie in a long while that's actually made me think a lot while I've watched it. And for that, I have to give Shymalan major kudos, because it's not often, I feel, that movies come out these days that encourage the viewer to actually think. The general trend is all not to consider or not to stir up thought and not to raise questions in a way that this film does. So for that, I have to give it major, major props. Regardless of the fact that I had not seen the other two movies and I read the summary, so obviously I'm going to be missing some major points here. When I compared my initial rough notes, which by the way are available on Patreon for supporters. If you want to read my funny rough notes, you should come over and check it out. Anywho, there are several plot holes related to character decisions and identities and events that happen in this movie that are not explained by the previous two films, and that had an impact on how I viewed the story, and it also impacted my understanding of the story. There are places in this film where there is rapid progression and then slow down to focus on various moments that are plucked out of the past, but they're done in such a way that it's almost like when you're trying to fast forward and rewind to find the spot that you left off in a YouTube video or in a Vimeo or in a podcast, and let's say for some reason your device didn't remember where you were, you're still trying to remember that point in time, but you just can't quite land on it. And that was overall the impression I had from this film. Shyamalan was trying to direct us toward a certain scene or toward a certain impression, but he was speeding up and slowing down at odd moments during the pacing and the timing of the story that detracted from that. It is also a very dark movie. When I say the movie's dark, it's not just dark in terms of tonality, because it's definitely dark. It's also really dark in terms of the lighting and the scenery in just about every single shot of the film, and it's very difficult to sometimes see details that would have lent themselves greatly to enhancing understanding or underscoring a point that I think Shyamalan was attempting to make. And the acting was great in this movie. I do think Bruce Willis was stoic but largely fairly wooden in this film, which was a bit disappointing to me. I don't think that Anya Taylor-Joy's performance was particularly strong in this film. Granted, she didn't have a lot of screen time, but it kind of looked like she was wondering if she was going to have a burrito or a salad for lunch in her scenes. Samuel L. Jackson was very quietly superior in his depiction as he played the role as a quiescent inmate in this. I thought he did a very, very good job in this movie, and he was sinister, and he was a very interesting player within this film, and I appreciated what he did with the role. I think by far James McAvoy blew it out of the water with his acting. I was really floored just by how amazingly he did slipping into and out of personalities, because this character has 23 different personalities. James McAvoy, I mean, my God, he even had like glints of insanity hinting in his eyes. You could just watch him become different people as they filmed, and that takes a lot of skill. Some actors have a hard enough time just pretending to be someone else as one person for the duration of the movie. He was 23 different people within the space of sometimes minutes in this film, and it was hella impressive. He did an amazing job, absolutely nailed it, nailed the behavior and mannerisms of someone who's having some psychosis issues, absolutely nailed just the sheer feralness and the raw emotions and anger felt by the different characters that came out of his personality. Just really astoundingly well done. I also found the performance from Sarah Paulson to be spectacular. She plays the doctor with such a fervent belief that it almost appears like medicine and what she is doing and her goals with the patients is a form of religious exaltation in a way, which kind of fits in with some patterns that start to emerge in this film, which are going to be discussed in the spoiler section. So she did an amazing job. I thought she was wonderful, especially there's an end scene where you really kind of see inside of her head and see from her perspective, and it's just, I think she did a great job. She's a great actress. Her talents were well on display in this film. I thought the movie was also great at highlighting the problems that can come with mental institutions and the attendance. There have been historically some documented issues with the treatment of patients in mental institutions. I know it's not all of them. However, I think this does a good job of highlighting that there are problems with the system. And there is some very strong commentary in this film about having the right to information that certain groups, be it political, religious, corporations, private entities, you get the idea. Having the right to the information that certain groups withhold as a people in general is a right for which we should stand up. And I thought that was very interesting because there has been an increasing problem, I think, in recent times where the public is given things that distract them from questioning or digging further into them rather than asking more questions and demanding the right to know this information. It was really interesting to watch that premise get called out within this movie, and I think it was done in a very tactful way, and I appreciated the message that Shymalan had underlying the main plot. And I will say that I think this is the most recent Shymalan film that I have seen that I could potentially recommend to be seen. This was a very good movie. As I said, I really appreciate it. It made you think. Some of the acting was just like beyond the talents that I've seen in a while from people. I thought that the message and the story overall were just very, very intriguing. There are some plot holes and some issues that go beyond the fact that most of it can be explained by the first two movies, but there are still problems that even that cannot address. But overall, this was a very intriguing film to watch. I would say my final rating for this film is a 64%. Now it's time to talk about spoilers. So, if you don't want to be spoiled, you best scooch. Scooch. All right, you've been warned. Before I move further, let's actually talk about the full plot. For those of you that may say, screw it. I don't care about watching this. I want to be spoiled and hear her full complaints. Because I know some of you do that. Shout out especially to Galligan. Basically, Glass and the Beast, played by James McAvoy, managed to break out of the asylum in addition to Bruce Willis's character, and are confronted by Bruce Willis in an attempt to stop them from what he thinks is going to be a terrorist attack on a tower that's being built in the city. It's revealed by David's son in the middle of this confrontation that Glass orchestrated a train crash that had Kevin's father and Bruce Willis on it. It killed Kevin's father, which triggered Kevin's superhero abilities, well, supernatural abilities, and that same crash triggered the knowledge of Bruce Willis that he had some kind of super abilities as well. This leads Kevin, because he's currently in his beast personality out of the Horde, which is what his 23 personalities are called, to turn on Glass. He fatally wounds him, and then he and Bruce Willis, as the overseer, stepping into his strength power, have a huge fight that greatly weakens them both. Right after which, Kevin is calmed down by Anya Taylor-Joy's character, and he gets calmed down enough that the superhero powers go to the side, and then he's shot to death. Bruce Willis's character is forcibly drowned in a puddle by the riot respondents after he is reached by Dr. Ellie Staple, and when he touches her, he sees a clover tattoo on her underside of her wrist, and he also sees a vision of her in a room in a meeting with this like elite group. And then as she moves from him to Glass to make sure that Glass is also dying, it is revealed that Ellie is part of a secret group, and their goal is to maintain equality. They will not allow a villain to rise or a superhero to rise, because where one is, the other follows. It actually reminded me quite a lot of Star Wars with the Sith and the Jedi. I was like, Glass makes a comment just before he dies that this is actually an origin story, and at the end it's revealed that he rigged the cameras in the mental institution to broadcast all of the footage to a private server, which was then beamed, presumably to everyone in the world, so that everyone is aware of information that had been suppressed by the group that Dr. Ellie Staple is an agent for. And his hope is that it will be an origin story for millions of people around the globe that suddenly realize that they have powers and that they can use them. This information's been withheld from them. Dr. Ellie Staple's character, I noted to myself early on watching the film that she seemed to be filled with a crazy, almost cult-like zealotry for what she was doing in her work with these patients. And it's very interesting because the way she speaks and comports herself sort of starts to unravel increasingly toward the end of the film. And so as you progress and you finally have the reveal, there's a bunch of little puzzle pieces that make sense. I think it's kind of predictable that you know it's going to end up being her. She's going to be involved in some way more than what's on the surface. But the exact extent of her involvement, I think, was skillfully handled. And watching those facets of her character reveal themselves, because I was picking up on it like, huh, that's kind of weird. She's playing it like that. So Sarah Paulson really did a great job at portraying that character. I was incredibly impressed by her. Her character reveal, you know, it really explained to me why I was questioning the methods she was using. Like, she was having one-on-one interviews and talking about their medical histories with them when they were all in a group. And there's a scene where James McAvoy is just eating a dude in his beast mode, literally beast mode. He's just eating this poor schmuck on the front lawn of this mental institution. The doctor turns to the teen girl played by Anya Taylor-Joy, I think her name's Casey, and she's like, "You need to go alone and save him." And I was like, I literally thought, this bitch, well, what? You're sending a teenage girl by herself? He's literally eating that guy's neck. Are you crazy? But she was really just trying to use them, and in fact, she was trying to brainwash them. I believe her group kind of ties in because there's no explanation I could find for the Clover tattoo, and perhaps it's made an appearance in the previous 2 movies, but I haven't, when I reviewed their summaries, I didn't see any mention of it. So as far as I know, it was also not explained within the film, unless I just can't remember. What I remember about the clover as a symbol is that the 3-leafed clover, because it was a 3-leaf clover, is most typically used as a symbol in various religions, specifically Christian religions. It's supposed to represent the Holy Trinity. And she's very, like I said, she gave off an impression of being someone who had very cult-like religious fervor throughout the film, and the way she treated and spoke to these patients and to their contacts, you know, Glass's mom, David's son, this is Bruce Willis's son, and to Casey, who for some reason is tied to James McAvoy's character, which I understand the history now that I've looked into the second film, but I'm about to talk about that. So, and the doctor at the end makes a point of saying, "We just can't have gods among men." It made me wonder if maybe her group was at some point based off of religion, or maybe she had some kind of motivation that was based on that territory from whatever point of view. Maybe it was a cult, I don't know. But it was very interesting. If you guys have any theories on that, if you've seen this about what the clover is, you should let me know, because I looked, like I said, and I couldn't find anything, so this is all based on my conjecture. That's just an area I will say that I was left wanting a lot more information. I don't feel like this was thoroughly explained in the movie at the end anywhere, and it definitely needs some kind of explanation that was lacking. The major issues I had with the story were also plot holes and how large pieces of the film were handled. There were moments where the timing didn't make sense. As I mentioned, it would speed up and slow down in an odd area. There was a scene right in the beginning where James McAvoy is walking away from the factory where he has these girls that he's kidnapped. And he goes under a sewer, and there's just somebody sitting down there, and he goes, "What's that smell?" And he morphs into the Beast. And he's away from the factory as far as we can tell. And then Bruce Willis is trying to save these girls. And then all of a sudden, like that, James McAvoy is there and just attacking him. And it's like, well, the timing is just strange. How did he teleport from being under in the sewers to suddenly being up in the factory above ground with Bruce Willis within like the space of 20 seconds? The timing just didn't make sense. And that's just one example. There was a couple instances like that that just were not explained well or shown well. There were also explanations lacking for how Glass kept escaping his room, why Dr. Staple wanted them all terminated in the end, especially when she makes a point of saying, "We don't want to kill these people." My guess is that she killed them because she couldn't brainwash them into thinking that they didn't really have powers and it was all in their head. There was also problems with the focus of the film. There were scenes where it would focus for a very long time on the scenes with the 3 inmates, flashbacks, etc. And then quickly it would cut to a scene where David's son would be typing on the computer and discovering names. Or it would quickly cut to a scene where a previously unintroduced teen, who at this point I realized was from Split, is just in class and talking to her guidance counselor or principal, whoever the character ends up being. But there's no real preamble for these quick cuts within the film. It's jarring because you're so focused on what's happening with the 3 patients that you're sucked out quickly and not given a lot of context and not given a lot of time to really grasp what those other characters, those side characters, are working on before you get jerked back into the world of the patients. So I felt like the pacing was lacking in many ways. The character of Casey in general, I mentioned I would speak a little more on this. There's no clear explanation given for why she would suddenly be so kind and gentle and loving almost to James McAvoy's character, especially based on what happened in the second film. You know, in the second film, he was trying to kill her, and sure, he did let her go, but how on earth do you go from this guy was trying to kill me, granted he granted me mercy, to now he's like my reason for being, and I'm obsessed with him, and I'm trying to look up his character in comic books, and I just want to make sure he's okay, and I'm going to approach him while he's still crazy and dangerous. Her motivations are not sold well at all in this. And I thought maybe this was leading up to, well, David's son and her, and maybe Glass's mom are all also have superpowers, and this is going to be like a revelation, like the girl secretly has a similar superpower to James McAvoy, and that explains her fascination. Because honestly, there's really no explanation I can see other than Stockholm Syndrome, and if that's the case, that was kind of strange. It's not really clear as well if, you know, the ending, did the mom, there's an implication that the mom and the son, the teen girl, were all involved with the beaming of the footage out of the institution, but it's not really shown how, and it's not really, they're sitting holding hands at the end. I just didn't really, how did he pull that off? I just want to know how he set that up and how he pulled that off, because he's, since 2000, when the first film was shot, he's allegedly been within this institution. So how did he manage that? How did he somehow set up a private server without help? Implication being he had help, but it wasn't really shown. I don't know. It's just, there's a couple things, and granted, I am being a little bit nitpicky, but there's just a couple things, like even the reveal of who Kevin's dad was and the connection between him and Bruce Willis as the overseer, even that was a tad anticlimactic. So there's some flaws in this movie for sure, but overall, this movie really does make you think. And I enjoyed getting introduced what felt like a parallel universe of comic book movie where I hadn't heard of this series. I thought this was a standalone film, and regardless, it was really interesting to see a different take on a very popular movie genre, one that was dark and violent, and it didn't hold back, and it showed the dark side to these agencies that are attempting to combat or control these people, and things that can happen to them and their families and the consequences of it. And it just really, really made me think. So I enjoyed it very much for that reason. I think that's all I have to say on this. I'm pretty sure I've been rambling for quite a while about this film. Do you agree with my criticisms, or do you think that this was better than I thought it was? I hope you are all doing very well, and I'm happy to be back filming again, and I will catch you later.